the far north of Europe, where the continent finally runs out of land and folds itself into the Arctic Ocean, there is a country shaped less like a nation and more like a jagged, unfinished sentence. Its coastline does not so much end as fracture, splintering into more than 50,000 islands, inlets, and channels carved by ice that took 10,000 years to retreat. Here mountains do not slope gently toward the sea, they fall into it, sheer and vertical, leaving behind valleys so deep and so drowned that the water inside them looks less like ocean and more like glass laid over stone. If its coastline was stretched into a straight line, it would circle more than halfway around the entire planet, a fact that sounds implausible until it is seen from the water itself, one headland folding into another, an endless procession of granite and pine and mist. Summer here brings a sun that refuses to set. Winter answers by taking the sun away almost entirely and lighting the dark instead with color. This is Norway. Seen from above, the country reveals itself as a study in extremity. A ribbon of green farmland along the southern coast gives way, within a few hundred kilometers, to the treeless, wind-scoured plateaus of the interior, and then further north still, to islands that seem to have been dropped into the sea by accident, jagged granite peaks with no foothills, rising straight from the water like the country changed its mind about where the land should stop. Between them lie the fjords themselves, long fingers of seawater pushed deep into the mountains by glaciers that have long since retreated, leaving behind cliffs that plunge 1,000 meters or more beneath the surface in places, so that the deepest parts of some fjords sit lower than the floor of the North Sea. In summer, the light never fully leaves. It simply turns gold and stays there for hours, gilding the fjords in a color that looks manufactured for film, while farmers work fields until close to midnight simply because the light allows it. In winter, that same light contracts to a few pale hours around midday, sometimes disappearing altogether above the Arctic Circle, and the rest of the sky becomes a canvas for something else entirely. The green, shifting curtain of the aurora borealis, drawing crowds northward to stand in sub-zero silence just to watch the sky move. Between these two extremes sits everything else. Rust-red fishing huts perched on stilts over the water, glaciers carving quietly into fjords, and small wooden towns tucked into valleys so narrow that direct sunlight may not reach the valley floor for weeks at a time in the depths of winter. But Norway's true character lies not just in its scenery, however cinematic, but in the quiet discipline of the people who have chosen to build a life inside it. This is a country that has made peace with darkness, with cold and with distance, and in doing so, has built one of the most stable, most trusted, and most consistently ranked among the world's happiest societies, not through spectacle, but through a kind of patient, unshowy competence repeated every single day. This is the story of the rhythm of daily life in Norway. Norwegians do not fight the weather, they furnish their lives around it. There is a well-worn local saying, there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. It is repeated to children before their first snowfall and to visitors before their first hike, and it functions less as a proverb than as a national operating instruction, drilled into people from the moment they are old enough to walk. The sea, the mountains, and the winter darkness are not treated as obstacles to be endured indoors, but as conditions to be met, dressed for, and in a strange way welcomed. Rain rolling in off the North Sea into Bergen, a city that receives rainfall on more days of the year than it does not, is simply the excuse to put on wool rather than the reason to cancel a plan. The polar night that swallows the far north for weeks each winter is simply the season for candlelight, ski trails lit by headlamps under the aurora, and the long, unhurried indoor evenings that give Norwegian home life its particular warmth. Even the sea ice and the fjord wind, when they arrive, are met less with resignation than with the practical calm of people who have simply done this before every year, for as long as anyone can remember. The elements here are not a backdrop. They are a collaborator in how the day is built, consulted every morning the way another country might consult a calendar. Norway is home to roughly 5.5 million people, fewer than live in the city of Los Angeles alone, spread across a landmass longer than the distance from Oslo to Rome, at a density of barely 15 people per square kilometer, among the lowest in Europe. Outside of the capital, this scale collapses distance into intimacy. In the small fishing towns of the north and the valley communities of the interior, anonymity is a rare commodity. The shopkeeper knows which brand of coffee a customer prefers before it is ordered. The ferry captain recognizes commuters by their coats. A country built this thinly across such an enormous stretch of coastline does not produce crowds. It produces neighbors and a social fabric where nearly everyone is, at most, a few conversations away from everyone else. Even Oslo, the capital and by far the largest city, holds barely 1 million people across its metropolitan area. A capital that behaves, at its edges, more like a very well-connected small town than a European megacity. A weekday morning in a Norwegian town begins quietly and usually in the dark for at least half the year. The smell of dark roast coffee and buttered, rye bread drifts from kitchen windows before the streets have fully woken. Bicycles and prams move past bakeries where the same handful of regulars queue for cinnamon-dusted skillingsboller, and where the person behind the counter has long since stopped needing to ask what they want. Children are bundled into snowsuits and walked, or more often skied, to school regardless of the temperature outside, because a Norwegian childhood without daily outdoor time is considered, quietly but firmly, incomplete. Kindergartens here routinely spend hours outdoors in freezing temperatures as a matter of educational philosophy, not an exception to it. Trains and trams fill with commuters wrapped in wool and down, thermoses of coffee in hand, the low murmur of conversation notably quieter than in most European capitals, since a comfortable silence between strangers is considered perfectly normal rather than awkward. By the time the pale winter sun clears the rooftops, if it clears them at all, the day is already well underway, built not around the light, but around habit, routine, and a kind of unhurried efficiency that gets the essential things done without ever quite looking rushed. Workdays, too, are built around a similar restraint. The standard workweek runs shorter than in much of Europe. Overtime is culturally frowned upon rather than admired, and leaving the office at 4 in the afternoon to collect a child from kindergarten is treated not as a lack of ambition, but as simply how a well-run life is supposed to look. Family remains the undisputed cornerstone of Norwegian life, though it wears its closeness differently than in more demonstrative cultures, less loud affection, more consistent presence. Grandparents are woven into weekly routines, collecting children from school, filling the gap between the end of the workday and dinner, and often taking on childcare duties that in other countries would be outsourced entirely to institutions. Sunday remains, even in a highly secular society, a day loosely reserved for family. A walk in the forest, a meal eaten slowly, a cabin visited out of habit rather than obligation, shops closed by law across most of the country so that the day resists being colonized by errands. It is a culture that prizes equality inside the household as much as outside it, among the highest rates of shared parental leave in the world, with a portion of paid leave reserved specifically for fathers and largely non-transferable, so that fathers pushing prams through the snow at 11 in the morning is as unremarkable a sight as mothers doing the same. The family unit here is less a hierarchy than a small, cooperative team, built around the quiet assumption that both parents will keep working, and both parents will keep parenting, without either role swallowing the other. That same cooperative instinct scales outward into the neighborhood and the town through a tradition the Norwegians call dugnad, an unpaid, collective work party where neighbors gather to rake the communal garden, repair a shared fence, paint a clubhouse, or clean up a sports field, followed always by coffee and waffles as payment enough. It is such a deeply embedded institution that Norwegian has a verb for participating in one, a ring dugnadia, and a mild social stigma attached to skipping it without good reason. A household that never shows up is quietly noticed, in a country that otherwise prizes not commenting on other people's business. The underlying principle, spoken or not, is that the well-being of one household is the concern of all of them. It shows up in small ways, a shoveled path left clear past a neighbor's gate before the neighbor themselves is even awake, a spare key held by 3 different houses on the same street, a shared trailer or lawnmower passed between 5 families rather than bought 5 separate times, and in large ones, in a welfare state that most Norwegians view not as charity extended downward, but as a shared insurance policy the whole community pays into together, on the understanding that the favor will eventually be returned. Norwegian identity is stitched together from threads older than the modern state itself. The language exists in 2 official written forms, bokmål and nynorsk, a linguistic compromise born from a 19th century push to reclaim a Norwegian tongue distinct from centuries of Danish rule. And in the far north, Sami remains an official language in several municipalities, spoken by the indigenous reindeer-herding people whose presence on this land predates the modern border by thousands of years, and whose bright 4-color clothing and joik-singing tradition remain living practices rather than museum pieces. In Trondheim stands Nidaros Cathedral, begun in the year 1070 over the burial site of King Olav II, still the site of Norway's royal coronations and among the largest medieval structures in Scandinavia, its spires visible above the wooden warehouses along the river for the better part of 1,000 years. Scattered through the rural valleys are the stave churches, dark, dragon-gabled wooden structures built nearly 1,000 years ago using shipbuilding techniques borrowed directly from the Vikings, joined without a single nail, several of which still stand and still hold services, their timber blackened with centuries of tar and wood smoke. Viking heritage runs deeper still through the culture than the longships displayed in Oslo's museums might suggest, in place names across the country, in a maritime confidence that never fully faded, and in a folk memory of a seafaring people who once reached Iceland, Greenland, and briefly North America itself, 5 centuries before Columbus. And on the 17th of May each year, that layered inheritance is worn quite literally. Tens of thousands of Norwegians in hand-embroidered bunad folk costumes, regionally distinct down to the stitch pattern and often handed down or commissioned at considerable expense, parade through every town in the country for Constitution Day, not a relic of the past, trotted out for tourists, but a living, breathing part of the present, renewed by every generation that puts one on. Norway's economy is a story of 2 halves running in parallel. The old half is written into the coastline itself, fishing fleets that have worked these waters for 1,000 years, hydropower drawn from the same mountain rivers that once turned watermills, and farming pushed to its northern limit in short, intense growing seasons. The new half was discovered almost by accident in 1969, when a vast oil field was found beneath the North Sea, and rather than spend the windfall as it arrived, the country funneled it into a sovereign wealth fund that has since grown into the largest of its kind on the planet, holding stakes in more than 7,000 companies across roughly 60 countries and worth, by recent count, over $2 trillion or more than 21 trillion Norwegian kroner. A sum so large it works out to roughly $400,000 of paper wealth for every citizen in the country, income almost none of them can touch directly, tied up by a strict fiscal rule that permits only a small, sustainable slice of the fund's expected return to be spent each year, designed to protect the principal for generations not yet born. That discipline has bought Norway something rarer than the money itself. A national reputation for resisting the so-called resource curse that has undone other oil-rich nations, and a currency of long-term thinking now being spent again on the transition away from oil altogether, toward hydropower, offshore wind, and electric transport, in a country where the domestic electricity grid already runs almost entirely on renewable sources, and electric vehicles have become the overwhelming majority of new car sales. Life inside this wealth is not cheap, however. Rent in Oslo and Bergen runs high by European standards, and a simple restaurant meal or a round of drinks can startle a first-time visitor. The trade-off for a system that funds free healthcare, tuition-free universities, and one of the flattest income distributions on Earth, where the gap between the highest and lowest earners remains, by design, deliberately narrow. If Norwegian cuisine has a sacred staple, it is not a single crop, but the sea itself, and specifically the cod that has anchored the northern economy for 1,000 years. In the Lofoten Islands, wooden racks called H-gels still stand along the shoreline each winter, hung thick with cod split and air-dried in the freezing wind until it hardens into stockfish, a product once so valuable it was traded for European wine and grain, and is still exported today, largely to Italy, where it forms the backbone of dishes locals here have never tasted. An odd loop of a food tradition that has quietly connected a Lofoten fishing family to a Neapolitan kitchen for centuries without either side fully realizing it. Salmon, too, has become a modern staple, farmed in the sheltered, cold waters of the fjords, in an industry that now sends Norwegian salmon to dinner tables on nearly every continent. At the table, the more labor-intensive traditions survive largely around the holidays: rakfisk, trout fermented for months in brine, until it develops a flavor that divides even Norwegians themselves, eaten on thin flatbread with raw onion and sour cream at gatherings built specifically around the dish, or lutefisk, whitefish cured in lye until it turns almost translucent, a dish inherited from lean centuries and now eaten as much for ritual and nostalgia as for taste. Daily life leans simpler and quieter: dense, dark rye bread, brunost, the caramel-colored brown cheese made from boiled-down whey, sliced thin with a cheese plane called an ostehøvel onto that same bread every single morning in kitchens across the country, an invention so specifically Norwegian, it was once voted one of the nation's proudest contributions to the world. And cinnamon buns pulled warm from bakery ovens on any given Sunday, alongside waffles, heart-shaped and dusted with sour cream and jam, served at nearly every dugnad, church coffee hour, and cabin afternoon in the country. But it is the coastline meal, the unhurried, candlelit dinner shared slowly with people who matter, phones left in another room, conversation allowed to run long, that Norwegians will insist, without exception, is the truest taste of home. To understand why Norwegians build their weekends, and often their identities, around the outdoors, it helps to stand inside one of the fjords itself. Geirangerfjord, carved by glaciers and now protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, drops nearly disappearing waterfalls named the Seven Sisters, and the Suter down cliff faces 1,000 meters high, straight into water that reflects them back almost perfectly still on a calm day. Further south, hikers climb for hours through birch forest to stand on Preikestolen, a flat granite platform jutting 600 meters above Geirangerfjord with nothing but air beneath its edge, or make the longer, harder pilgrimage to Trolltunga, a tongue of rock suspended above a lake so far below it looks abstract. A hike that draws tens of thousands of visitors each summer despite requiring the better part of a full day on foot. In the north, the Lofoten archipelago rises directly from the sea in razor-edged granite peaks with almost no foothills at all, ringing red and ochre fishing villages built on stilts, called råbua, over the water itself. Further north still lies the North Cape, a windswept cliff often described as the northernmost point of mainland Europe, where visitors stand at the edge of a continent and look directly out over open Arctic Ocean. Norwegians have a word, friluftsliv, open-air living, for the near-obligatory relationship with this landscape, and it is not treated as scenery to be viewed from a car window. Families ski cross-country before breakfast, hike after work in the endless summer light, forage for wild blueberries and cloudberries along mountain trails in late summer, and retreat most weekends to a hit, a simple wooden cabin, often without electricity or running water by choice, because the point of the cabin is precisely the absence of everything that fills the rest of the week. The land here is not a passive backdrop to daily life. It is an active, physical presence that Norwegians step into on purpose, almost every day, in every season, in a relationship with wilderness so normalized that the right to roam and camp freely across almost any uncultivated land, known as a lemmensretten, is protected by law and treated less as a privilege than as a basic feature of being Norwegian. Even the country's glaciers, from Jostedalsbreen in the south to the ice fields feeding the fjords of the north, are treated as destinations rather than distant abstractions, guided walks led across them each summer by people who grew up in their shadow. Binding this fractured mountainous geography together required some of the most ambitious engineering in Europe. Norway is threaded with more than 1,000 road tunnels, including the Lærdal Tunnel, the longest road tunnel on Earth at over 24 kilometers, cut straight through solid rock and lit at intervals with blue and gold caverns designed to keep drivers alert and calm across the crossing. Along the west coast, the Atlantic Road hops between skerries on a sequence of low bridges that, in a storm, appear to disappear into the waves entirely, water breaking clean over the roadway while cars still cross. Where roads cannot reach, an extensive coastal ferry and express boat network fills the gaps, so reliably that entire commuter schedules are built around ferry crossings the way other cities build them around subway lines, and engineers are now racing to make the entire coastal highway ferry-free altogether, with serious plans underway for the world's first floating and submerged fjord crossing tunnels, engineering that does not yet exist anywhere else on the planet. High-speed rail links Oslo to Bergen across a mountain plateau so exposed that the line is regularly buried under snow fences and avalanche tunnels for weeks each winter, while the Flam Railway descends one of the steepest stretches of standard gauge track in the world, dropping nearly 900 meters in 20 kilometers through waterfalls and switchbacks blasted directly into the mountainside. The paradox all of this infrastructure creates is a striking one: a fishing village of 400 people, reachable only by boat or a single-lane tunnel through solid rock, with fiber-optic internet as fast as anything found in Oslo. Remoteness here rarely means being cut off. Life in Norway is, above nearly everything else, a study in contrasts between light and dark, and the culture has built an entire emotional architecture around the swing between them. Summer days stretch toward the surreal. In the far north, above the Arctic Circle, the sun does not set at all for weeks, and towns fill their extra hours with midnight football matches, late boat trips, and gardens tended at 11 at night, under a sky still fully bright, sleep schedules loosening to match a body clock that no longer has darkness to obey. Winter reverses the arrangement entirely. In Tromsø and further north, the sun disappears below the horizon for close to 2 months of polar night, and the culture folds inward to meet it. Candles lit in every window regardless of religion, wool blankets pulled from cupboards. The concept of coastlig, a soft, specific coziness with no exact English equivalent, deployed almost as a coping mechanism and a genuine source of comfort in equal measure. It is precisely this darkness, though, that delivers Norway's most famous nighttime spectacle, the aurora borealis, rippling green and occasionally violet or red across the sky above Tromsø and the Lofoten Islands on clear, cold nights, drawing visitors from around the world to stand bundled in the cold for hours on the chance of seeing it, while locals, having seen it 100 times before, still tend to step outside when a neighbor calls to say the sky is moving. Day is for movement, production, the long outward reach of the midnight sun. Night, especially the long winter night, is for the fire, the blanket, and the people gathered closest. None of this comes without friction the country is still working through. How does a nation whose wealth was built on North Sea oil credibly lead a green energy transition, without the transition itself hollowing out the coastal towns that oil built and still, in places, employs? How does Norway keep its smallest fishing villages alive as their populations grey and their schools empty, without simply subsidizing decline indefinitely? How does a country with some of the highest costs of living in Europe, where a simple grocery run or a night out can startle even wealthy visitors, keep housing within reach for the young people it is trying so hard to keep at home, particularly in Oslo and Bergen, where prices have climbed sharply? How does the government continue to lean on a fund whose withdrawals now cover more than a quarter of the national budget, without eroding the fiscal discipline that made the fund trustworthy in the first place? And how does a society that has prided itself on relative homogeneity and consensus continue to integrate rising immigration, projected by Norway's own statistics agency to become the primary driver of population growth within the next 2 decades, without fraying the social trust that underpins the entire system? There are no easy answers offered here, and Norwegians themselves rarely pretend otherwise. These are the questions the country confronts thoughtfully, town hall by town hall, budget cycle by budget cycle, aware that the same careful, long-term discipline that built the oil fund will need to be applied again, in different form, to whatever comes after it. Norway exists in a delicate and enduring balance between light and dark, between the ancient stave church and the offshore wind turbine, between the fishermen hauling cod by hand and the sovereign fund holding stakes in a slice of nearly every listed company on Earth. It is a nation that discovered extraordinary wealth and chose patience over indulgence, that lives for months at a time without full daylight, and answered that darkness not with despair but with candlelight, wool, and each other. It is a country of Vikings and fjords, yes, but also of quiet mornings, shared waffles, and neighbors who show up before they are asked. It is a living testament to the idea that in a world of relentless change, there is a deep and lasting power in a life that is grounded in community, in landscape, and in the quiet, timeless rhythm of the fjord.